So let's talk about what is happening first. So where is the market? So this is just some of the stats that NAR has put out recently as of April 2025. So this is a little graphic, which, by the way, I think these are really good graphics to go grab and drop on social media. Everybody is always curious about what's going on in real estate, and everybody is always making comments that are either true or not true about real estate, right? People love to just say random things like nobody can afford a house anymore. Is that actually true? Right? So there's a whole bunch of, if you go to NAR, there's a whole bunch of these graphics that are really easy to grab and just drop on social media, and they will start conversations, right? So I would suggest you grab some of these and just get in a rhythm of putting these things out there. But let's look at the stats really quickly. So this is as of April. This is closed sales. So closed sales nationally are down. Based on seasonal adjustments right now and what has happened so far in 2025, they are expecting us to land with about 4 million closed sales in 2025. To give you a little perspective, I want to say at our peak of the pandemic market, we were at, I believe it was 6.2 million, somewhere right in that range. So it's a pretty significant drop off. Last year was right around 4 million also. So it's looking, while they were hoping that number would bump up a little in 2025, right now it's being adjusted and it's looking like we're going to settle right around that same 4 million, which would be a stagnant market. You also see the month over month changes. So year over year, so far, 2025, as of April, the market is down in closed sales by 2%. Right? You can kind of call that stagnant. It's really not moving much at all up or down. Month over month, we saw a 0.5% drop in closed sales. So it gives you a little bit of an idea. Inventory, we're seeing that increase. You know, for a lot of us to see 4.4 months of inventory sounds wacky. So I'm not sure where you are sitting, but there is a high likelihood if you're sitting in New England, you are not sitting in a place that has 4.4 months worth of inventory. You're likely sitting in a place that might have 1.5 months of inventory, maybe two. Median sales price, same thing, continues to rise, but at a much slower pace. Year over year, we're up 1.8%. Okay, so those are those stats. This is just a quick chart of existing home sales. Again, we've drifted down to about 4 million is what they're predicting for 2025. And right now we're down by about 2%. This sort of shows you what that looks like. And again, going back, I said 6.2, 6.4 was the peak of the market. So we're down about 2.4 million from that peak, right? Pretty significant. This is kind of an interesting one. This is pending home sales, right? So this is, again, a metric that I call a windshield metric. Right? If we're looking at what's pending, that's telling us what's going to close in the future. So that's a windshield metric. When we're looking at closed units, that's a rear view metric. That's something that already happened. Right? So this gives us an idea of the direction that we are going in. And nationally, pending sales are down annually, and they are up month over month everywhere except New England. Right? So across the board annually, pending sales are down. Month over month, everywhere other than the Northeast, pendings are up. So you can see here, Midwest is up 4.9 month over month, 9.8 in the South. The West is up 4.8, and we are down 0.5 in the Northeast. We also have the largest drop in pendings nationally. So while the whole country is down, pendings are down, we have the largest drop in pendings in the Northeast. And again, month over month, we're actually the only region that is still down. Okay. This one I think is really interesting. So this shows inventory. Okay. And this is another really good visual to give you an idea. So getting rid of all the details of the stats, what's really fun is watching you all turn your heads so you can read what those dots are. But what you see is this, the red, that is inventory is getting worse. The light blue is inventory is essentially stagnant. So our inventory issue isn't getting better or worse. It's just sort of froze. And dark blue is where areas where they're actually moving towards a more balanced market. Okay. So as you can see, there's actually more light blue and more dark blue than there is red. And you can also see that there is two significant concentrations of red dots, which means inventory is moving further away from being balanced. And that would be California and the Northeast, right? So once again, late to the party as always. Our inventory right now is continuing to move in the opposite direction as to what most of the country is doing. Now, again, all that being said, history has shown us, again, that if we pay attention to what's happening in other parts of the country, we have a pretty good idea of what's coming down the pike, right? And this would tell us that inventories are starting to balance out. Now, where we have the biggest challenge, and everybody here knows this, the two things we need to happen in order to balance out our inventory and get back to a more balanced market is interest rates to drop so that people start making life decisions instead of rate decisions, and new construction to backfill the lack of units that we need in order to meet the buyer demand. Our biggest challenge in New England is that we don't have new construction of single family homes at scale in the way that other areas, specifically the South, do, right? North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, Georgia, right? There's a tremendous amount of single family new construction. Nationally, new construction is up. So there are more new home starts happening, right? So that is a good sign nationally that we're making progress. There is a stat out there based on current new starts of homes. We're currently pacing about 7 years is what it would take in order to catch up with the demand that currently exists for single family housing, right? So for whatever that's worth, that is a stat that is circulating out there. Another thing that I think is interesting and part of the conversation, I wanted to make sure I share this. Going back to the rate conversation, there is nobody that I am aware of who is in a position that we would be inclined to listen to them that is predicting a significant drop in mortgage rates in 2025 or 2026. Most predictions are that we're going to keep bouncing around somewhere in the 6 range, both in 2025 and 2026. I think right now, probably average, we're sitting at about 6.6 for an average 30-year loan. So we're sitting in that mid to high 6 range right now. Expectations are 2025 and 2026, we're going to stay somewhere in that mid 6-ish range. So there doesn't seem to be any reason to believe that that's going to drop to a level that it's necessarily going to free up a lot of inventory. Now, that is relevant to this slide. We all know part of that challenge is the people who are locked up in those extremely low rates. It becomes very difficult to make an intelligent decision to move, right? I see Janine pointing at herself. I could point at myself. I have a sub-3 mortgage rate. That's pretty hard to make math work as to why I would sell my current home and buy another home, right? Because of that rate. I can buy half the house and have a greater mortgage payment because of current rates. Now, that being said, this shows you how many people are actually locked up in that situation, and it's less than most people believe, right? So number one, pretty staggering, 35.2% of Americans own their home free and clear. That's a pretty crazy stat. 35.2% do not have a mortgage, which means they're not part of that group that is locked up by rate, right? If they chose to sell, they could sell and use that cash to buy a home cash or put a significant down payment on. So 35.2% is not involved in that sub 3% lock situation. Then it shows us it's 9% currently, or 6% or above, right? So most of those are people who have bought in the last probably 18 months, give or take. 5 to 6% is another 5.3%. 4 to 5 is 8.4%, right? So the largest chunk of our pie is actually people who are mortgage free. It's about, I think that adds up to probably about 22% that are between 6 and 4%. And then you get into 18 and a half that are 3 to 4, 11.6 that are in that sub 3 range, right? And that's really that group that is probably pretty locked up. And the reality is, rates probably have to get into the 5 range in order for those people to make a life decision rather than a rate decision, right?
I'm going to just interject for a quick second. I didn't read the article, but I saw a headline and I need to find it. It says, it's really time to break up with your 3% mortgage rate. So it was an article telling people, look, if there's something out there that you want, don't be held back because you have such a low interest rate. But I need to go back and reread it so I can get the gist of it. But there are people making that case.
100%. Yep. Another stat that's kind of interesting is the age of the average first time home buyer is actually at 38 right now. So as much as we have this imbalance of buyer demand and inventory, people are actually waiting significantly longer to purchase their first home. So they at 38, the average age, if you look at the population that is 18 to 46, that's about 60% of the US population, if I'm not mistaken, is 18 to 46, right? And that age range, obviously that's a very big range, but that chunk of population, there's a lot of pent-up buyer demand in there. And a lot of people that are in those mid to high 30s that are actually just starting to put their toe into the home buying market, right? So there's a lot of opportunity in that first time home buyer, but you have to know the demographic is much older than what it used to be. Okay. Any comments, thoughts, ideas about any of those stats? Okay. All right. So let's talk about pricing a little bit. So bear with me now. I'm going to use this is a very old data. This is actually a buy package from a home that I purchased a bazillion years ago. The only reason I'm using it is I just want to go through the concept of the process that we would go through in order to price the home. And again, my hope and my intent is that there's a nugget or two that you can pull out of this process in order to be able to use that when it comes to pricing strategies for your listings. So number one, so this is an actual buy package. So just to give you an idea of how it used to work, those 80 homes that we bought, all but probably 5 to 6 of those homes were off-market homes that we purchased. Okay, so we had a marketing machine that would drive leads. Those leads would come in, they would be received by the office would book an appointment. There was an assistant who would create a buy package, which a buy package is really just the CMA. And then either myself or at the point in time which we had a buyer who went out and made the offers on my behalf. Essentially, we would wake up, we would have an appointment to go see a homeowner. We would show up, we would have this buy package attached to the appointment. We'd open it, review the data, we would drive our comps. And then by the time we went in the house, we knew what the after repair value of the home was going to be. All we had to do now is figure out what work had to be done in order to get it into saleable condition and what was it going to cost us to do that work. With that last bit of information, we could figure out what we could offer in order to purchase the home, which again, where this is all relevant is we were showing up blind, and within 10 to 12 minutes of reviewing the data that had been compiled for us, making a decision as to what this home is worth after we fix it up. And then we were making an offer on the spot. And if that offer was accepted, we were writing a purchase and sale agreement on the spot. So again, accuracy mattered, right? So number one, obviously we just pull public records. So we have the basic information on the property. I'll give you a couple of little tidbits that you'll see on here and how we use them, but I'll tie back to that afterwards. So one, we pull public records so we know exactly what we're looking at. The next thing is we would pull all of our comparables by categories, just like you would do on any CMA, right? So we would pull all your expireds, cancels, and withdrawals. We'd pull our actives, and then we would pull our closed and our pendings, okay? We always pulled them separately because we wanted to look at those buckets of data completely separate, right? One thing you want to remember is when you pull data and you mash it all together, it blurs the data and you miss valuable points. So it's real easy to go in and pick all the statuses and just pull all the data, but you miss details when you do that, especially when markets change. When you start seeing inventory and days on market growing, it becomes really important to be able to look at that data separately, and you're often going to see patterns, obvious patterns like, pricing. You're going to see your expireds and your withdrawals tend to be a higher price per square foot. Your actives are going to be less than that, but more than your solds, right? You start to see the trends, right? The other piece that I feel like is really important is oftentimes when we go to pull comps, we go straight to the details, right? So maybe I have a 1,500 square foot split level ranch that's 3 bedroom, 2.5 bath. And I put all those details in. And then I put my range of square footage and I immediately go straight to the comparable homes. Again, I think you lose a lot of information and a lot of data when you do that. My suggestion is always start very, very broad. So we would always pull each one of those statuses within MLS separately, and we would start out without any detail whatsoever other than a range, a geographic range. So we'd put a radius in, which is going to depend on the area that you're in, right? Obviously, if it's urban, right, where there's tighter housing, it's going to be very small. If it's a very rural area, it's going to be very big. So it could be anywhere from 0.1 mile all the way up to a mile or more, depending on the area you're in. But all we would do is our geographic radius. We would leave out the style of home, the square footage, all the things, because what we're trying to see first is just what does inventory in that neighborhood look like? What's the floor? What's the ceiling? What's the mix of inventory? All those caveats, right? So we're just trying to get a feel for the area more than we are trying to narrow it down to the specific comps. And there's a lot of mistakes you can make if you don't do this. The example I always give when I'm teaching the rehab class, I had a gentleman who I was coaching and mentoring, and he had me come out to take a look at a property that he had the opportunity to purchase. And he wanted me to just look at the construction numbers and make sure he had those numbers correct. While I was there, I said, how do you feel about pricing? Are you comfortable on that? Do you need me to look at the ARV? He said, no, I'm good. I said, okay, cool. Just do me a favor. Let me see your buy package before I go in. I had taught him how to do a buy package like this. Instead of handing me this, what he handed me was 3 comparable properties that he printed off of MLS, right? This was a colonial, like I think it was late 60s, right? There were many houses like that in the area. And he basically just printed off, 3 colonials that had sold in the last however many months. There was no other data whatsoever. Now, the reason he had me out there is he made an offer and the seller was asking him to raise the offer by $10,000, and he wasn't sure if he had room to do that. When I looked at the comps, what I saw was he had undervalued the house, and there was plenty of room for him to give that seller that extra $10,000. The way I noticed that is when I saw that he didn't do the correct research, and I took out the iPad and pulled up MLS, what I saw very quickly when I pulled the broad information was in that neighborhood, there were a whole bunch of colonials just like his that had sold. So it looked really easy to comp. And all of those colonials were in very similar condition, what I always call probate condition. What I mean when I say probate condition, they've got good bones and they've never been updated, right? So it's got a solid roof. It's got, the electric is up to date. The boiler's up to date. Yet we still have Willy Wonka wallpaper, shag carpet, all those beautiful things from the 70s. All of these colonials just happen to be like that. But what I noticed is a bunch of split level ranches in the neighborhood that sold for significantly more. When I drilled down, those just happen to be updated. And what I knew was a colonial is typically going to sell for a higher sales price than a split level. It's a more desirable floor plan. So the fact that these split levels were selling for significantly more than the colonials showed you that in that neighborhood, there is a much higher ceiling from a pricing standpoint. And the only reason all these colonials sold for less was their condition, right? Since we were there to value that house based on what it was worth after he fixed it up, he was left that information out and therefore was undervaluing the home. Long story short, there was plenty of room for him to raise that offer. and be able to make and do a really good deal and make a really healthy profit. Those are the details you miss when you drill down. So we would start out with the map, and this is all just very broad. Right now I can see the general area, and they're giving me just the basic information on each property. Again, all I'm trying to do is get a feel for the neighborhood at this point. We would pull that for our active properties. After, and this is an important part, after we pull each status, and every MLS is a little bit different, but usually there's some kind of a statistics report that you can pull that will take all the data from those comps and give you these statistics. So what are the average beds, baths, square footage, list price, price per square foot, all of those things, right? So once we pull all of the actives, we would then print or download the statistics report so that I can see that data for those active. What are the days on market? What is the average price per square foot? Right. I just had a conversation with somebody that I was helping price out a multifamily property about the usefulness of price per square foot. And their belief was they don't believe in price per square foot as a data point. And I just have a different feeling about it. I don't use it to price properties. I use it to check my opinion on price after I've established the price. And we'll talk about that a little bit more afterwards, but you can't do that if you don't have the data. So this gives us a picture of what's active. Right. Then we would move on and do the exact same thing for your expireds, your withdrawals, right? These are the kids we don't want to hang out with. So we want to make sure that we don't look like them when we go on the market, because that's not the outcome that we're trying to accomplish. Pulling the same thing, all very broad. We're not drilling down. Then we're going to do the same thing. We've got our statistics for those. Then we're going to pull our actives, same, super broad. These are not specifically comps. You can see some of them are capes, some of them are ranches. And now, because we're dealing with the properties that have actually sold, which I know we have a range of experience that are probably on the call. When we're looking at all of the different statuses within MLS, it is the closed properties that we're using to price the properties, right? The way we want to look at it is closed is what the market is actually accepting today. Actives are the homes that have not sold yet, right? Those homes are being rejected. In today's market, anything on the market probably past a week is questionable, right? Because things are selling so quickly. And then your expireds and withdrawals, those are kind of the ceiling that we want to make sure that we don't go past, because that's going to get us the wrong outcome, right? So we're really looking at it as we're using our closed data to price the property. Once we do that, we then want to look at what's active and say, if we went live today, how would we look against the competition that currently exists? That's how you want to use those data points. So we have a little bit more detail. For those of you like bringing the rehab conversation into it, the reason you see for the close, they would give me a little bit more detail. This is still broad. And they would give me a little bit of an idea as far as conditions of the property. Right. This was just to save us time when we were in the field. So we didn't have to look up each individual property and try to see the condition. So we just had a scale of 1 to 10 that we used. Anything 9 or above was a flip. Right. If you got down into the, anything 3 or below, that was a property that needed to be flipped. Right. That was a distressed home. Right. And then you had the space in between that if you were like a 4 to a 5, that's what I refer to as probate condition, right? Good bones, but super dated. Once you get to like 5 to 8 or 6 to 8, those are more regular retail condition. So they would just put that information in there so we had a little bit of a reference point. Then we pull our statistics again, right? So now that I can see the price per square foot, the average days on market, all of those different things, they would usually take the median and the average, and they would do the math based on the square footage to see where that number fell. Now, this is an interesting one because you'll notice if you look at these, you see the difference in properties that are pending. The median and average sales price per square foot is in the 123 range. but when you come down here, it drops significantly to 96 and 105. That's something you have to be careful of when you're looking at this data. So they do this math times the price per square foot, and the number landed very, very low. When you see that, when I would see that gap in the field, that meant to me there were properties that sold way under market value, and that was probably a condition thing. I need to go back and look at those details, or just throw out the fact that that's a relevant number, because the next thing we're going to do is pull the actual comps. So all this is broad data. Now, finally, we're going to narrow it down to the homes that actually match the property. And these are going to be our comparable properties. These are the ones that we're going to look at, the condition, the features, everything else, and decide based on everything that we've just seen, where do we believe the right pricing is for this property, right? And again, coming at it from a rehab standpoint, we were always pricing them based on what they would sell for when we were done repairing them, which they refer to as after repair value, right? Not the condition that they're in today. That was irrelevant to us, because the calculation that we used in order to come up with our offer was based on after repair value, not current condition and current value. Okay. So then we would pull our comparables, right? Just like all of you do for your CMAs, and we would establish our price. By the time you go through pulling all this data, your brain should be narrowing pretty tightly in on what you believe is the right pricing for this house. Now, there's a couple other little steps that I would take. So one is, and then obviously, once I have my three, we're pulling that statistics report again. And now I'm going to check if I'm thinking, all right, I'm in the 300 range for this house. Now I'm going to do price per square foot times my square footage and see if it falls in that general area of where I believe it's going to be, right? So when I had that conversation with the agent about the relevance of price per square foot, I do agree that if you're using that number to price a property, it could move you in the wrong direction or move you away from accuracy. But if you're using it to check the decision that you've already come to, then I believe it's a very valuable data point. Okay. So now I'm going to use that data point to check. Okay. I believe I'm in the 305 range. Now, when I run that math, does it match up pretty close? Okay, cool. It checks that box. The other thing I would check once I got to this point is Zillow. I know that's a dirty word, and no, I do not put a lot of weight in Zillow. It's just another data point for me to check it against, right? What we know about Zillow is when inventory is very consistent, it tends to be very accurate. When you're in an area where there's a lot of different inventory and different types of homes, it tends to be much less accurate. I'm not putting a lot of weight in it. It's just another data point I'm checking. Okay. Then I would pull my 5-year street scene. So the 5-year street scene, and this can be really helpful, especially when you have unique situations. 5-year street scene is very simple. You go in MLS, you check every status in MLS, and you change the date range to 5 years. And you're looking, and you put in the street address. So you're looking at every attempt to sell and or every successful sale on that street within a 5-year period. Here's where this can be really helpful. One, maybe, I guess 2 good examples. Maybe you're pricing a home that's on like a double yellow line. You've got good comps, but none of those comps are on the double yellow line, right? They could be right behind you, right? So they could be 100 yards away, but they're off that main road. How much does that actually affect the pricing? The 5-year street scene can sometimes help you figure that out. The other place it can be helpful is maybe you did a 3-month date range. Now you run the 5-year street scene and you catch a property that sold 5 months ago or 6 months ago that is useful information, right? So it'll help you catch that. The other place it can be helpful is in really urban areas where things can change street to street drastically. One of the examples I always use is we ran a buy package on a property in a rougher neighborhood of a Connecticut city. And what we found on the street scene was that there had been, I believe it was 38 attempts to sell a home on that street in the last 5 years. And exactly 0 of them were successful. all 38 were expireds and or withdrawals or cancels. Right? When I see that, I go, I don't need to know why that is. I just need to know that it's true, to know that I'm not buying a house on that street if my intention is to buy it and resell it quickly, because nobody has ever successfully sold a home on that street in the last 5 years, right? That's a deal killer right there. So the 5-year street scene can be really helpful. The other thing, and this is not necessarily for your CMAs, but for those of you who do invest, whether it's long-term or buying, rehabbing, and reselling, these are little things that I learned the hard way. One, checking for flood zones. I mean, we should be doing that on our listings for sure, but checking to make sure the property is or is not in a flood zone. Believe it or not, I did actually accidentally purchase property in a flood zone without knowing it was in a flood zone. For those of you who rehab, that is a very big deal. It is a very big deal because there are FEMA regulations. When you are rehabbing a home that is within a flood zone, if the cost of construction exceeds 50% of the value of the property, they will require you to raise the property, mean put it on stilts. So it becomes a real problem, right? It's a FEMA regulation. So if you do that, if you get a property under contract and don't realize until late in the game it's in a flood zone, you could have a real problem. The other one I learned the hard way, and from that point forward, we always checked when we were purchasing a home, was the sex offender list. If you're buying a home and you happen to have a registered sex offender next door, if your intent is to buy that home and resell it quickly, you probably want to be aware that that exists. I don't know that that's a thing I would check for a standard listing, but if I'm buying the home, I certainly want to know for two reasons. One, that could absolutely affect my buyer pool and how many people are willing to purchase that home. And number two, if I'm aware that that exists and I'm selling the home, that's just a moral decision. Me personally, I'm not going to be comfortable selling that home without disclosing that information, which once again shrinks my buyer pool. So when you're buying and rehabbing homes, if that's important to you, you make that mistake once, and after that, you check. Okay. So once you run through all of this, then again, you should be pretty solid on your number. Now you're just checking those data points again against your price per square foot, against your Zillow, looking at your 5-year street scene to see if there's any new data that's helpful or useful, and or you're using that 5-year street scene when you do have those unique properties, unique situations, like your super urban areas, your yellow lines, all of those things. Any questions about that process, whether it's for CMAs or whether it's for buying? What do you got, Janine?
I've never heard of the 5-year street scene. Am I the only one? Am I behind the times?
I don't think you're behind the times. I don't know many people who do that.
Is that something I can, like, is there a metric in MLS that I can click and it just shows me? Or what do I do? I do like this through 5 years ago, and then you put the street, and then it should just tell me all the activity on that street. I think it's just that, right?
You check every status, you put the street address in, and then you just reset your date range to 5 years.
5 years. Okay.
And then I would typically just pull the simple one-line report. And then if I saw something that was valid or useful, then I could click through and investigate that further. But all it is every status, you set your date range to 5 years, and then you put in the street.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
That is not something I did as an agent. That is something I learned when I started rehabbing, and it was very useful. But all those little nuggets that I learned and added on to what I always did before, because again, the degree of accuracy that I had to have was very urgent. I mean, all of us want to do everything possible to price a home correctly for our clients. Yet, when you're showing up and making an offer on the spot, you have to be right. If you're wrong, you're going to lose a lot of money. So there's little strategies like the 5-year street scene that I learned in that process. And most of them either came from either A, running into a situation where I had to think about, okay, this is a little unique. So how do I figure out how to adjust on this or pull data that's going to help me narrow this down? Or I made a mistake. Like a lot of the strategies that I added over time were mistakes. I did something wrong. It cost me money. And then I said, okay, well, how do I make sure that doesn't happen again? And then we instituted a new process or a new strategy to make sure we don't make that mistake again. 5-year street scene is one of those.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. What else? All right, I'll add just this one thing. And then if there's any comments, questions, we'll take those and then we will wrap up. For those of you who may be investing and or are interested in investing, and you might be wondering, okay, great, you figured out the value of the home. What did you do with it then? So our math to purchase a home was always based on the after repair value. So again, we were going there and we were valuing the home based on what it was going to be when we were done fixing it. We don't care what it's worth now. Once I had that number, I would take that number times 65%. That was my price that I could pay if the property was turnkey. So simple math. If the home was worth $100,000, to make the math easy, and it was turnkey, I could literally hang a lockbox on it and resell it the day we closed. 65,000 would be the number that I would offer. If it was going to cost me $30,000 to get the house into that condition, then I subtract my construction from the 65 cents on the dollar. That's my offer. So in that scenario, if the home was 100,000 ARV times 65 cents on the dollar gets us to 65,000, it's going to cost 30 to rehab it. The offer on that home would be 35,000. Now, a couple of things there. In today's market, it is 100% possible, yet it is challenging to find homes at that deep of a discount. In any market, it is. There was a lot of time, energy, and effort that went into creating enough opportunity to be able to buy homes at that level of a discount. So those opportunities can still exist. And there's a lot of people out there rehabbing now that, because price points have grown so significantly, like I think if you look at the Northeast as a whole, and you go back 5 years, we've probably had somewhere in this range of 60 to 65% appreciation when you compound everything. So prices have gone way up, which means margins have gone way up, right? So even if you're making 20% total net profit, that number is a bigger number today. So you're definitely seeing rehabbers out there that as a percentage, that window is getting smaller. And here's what I would caution you on. If you are a person who is investing, I run into people a lot who will say, as long as I can make 40 grand, I'm good. And they just do their math and subtract what they want to make as a margin. That is a very dangerous model, right? So if they're looking at the property and saying, as long as I can make 40 grand, I'm happy, 30 grand, I'm happy. I could buy it for this. It's going to cost this to fix it. That leaves me 30 grand, I'm good. That is a strategy that a lot of people deploy when markets are really hot. And as soon as the market turns, it bites them. And they usually stop rehabbing because they realize they didn't actually know how to rehab correctly. They didn't know how to analyze properties, price properties, or buy properties at the right prices. What they were actually doing is they were just in a really good market and the market was fixing all their mistakes. When the market shifts, that becomes very, very dangerous, especially in higher price points, because that window, if you miss a few things, can get small really quickly, right? So whether it's 65 cents on the dollar or it's 70 or 75 cents on the dollar, having some formula like that is the safe way. So those 80-ish houses that we did over that 5-year period, we made money all but twice. And there's a story behind both of the ones that we lost money on. We lost 6,000 on one, 13,000 on another. Every other property we were profitable. And the reason was we followed a formula, right? If we stepped outside of that formula, that's usually when we had a problem. So thoughts, ideas, ahas before we wrap. It's a quiet crew today.
Ben, I have one question actually, and this is sort of touching back to the mortgage rate. Is there any incentive for a prospective seller to do seller financing? So say if people are having trouble with the 6, to 7%, could a seller be like, hey, I'll hold the note and only charge 3%, or something a lot more attractive to a lot more people. Is that even something a seller would even want to consider? I mean, is that even like a safe move, or should they let
So it does happen. You tend to see it more in the investing side of things. So
Right,
it is
yeah.
it is not uncommon in the
Mm-hmm.
investor side of the world that there
Right.
might be owner financing. Sometimes there's a scenario where the mortgage is assumable,
Mm-hmm.
and they're leveraging that strategy. Um, Typically, with owner financing, the challenge with that is more often than not, when owner financing is being leveraged, the terms aren't necessarily better than what's
Mm.
available to your
Okay.
regular consumer.
Mm-hmm.
It's usually being leveraged to have more leverage, if that makes
Mm.
sense. In other
Okay.
words, an investor might be coming in and saying, look, if you take a note on this with a 7% interest rate or an 8% interest rate with a 5-year balloon, but you're putting very little money down or even no money down.
Mm-hmm.
More often than not, seller financing is being leveraged so that an investor can get into a property without having to tap into conventional financing. And it's
Yeah.
usually a higher number, not a lower number. So
Mm-hmm.
that's where you see
Okay.
it more often. And the win for
Mm-hmm.
the investor is, well, I'm not tying up other resources. So if I
Yeah.
can get other financing over here, even if it's a point higher than I could get from a bank, I'm
Mm-hmm.
still going to go to the bank now and get more financing. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where you tend to see it leveraged more as opposed to getting a better rate.
Okay. And how about like rent to own? Do we see that as a attractive path to anyone, or is just the market is, with the way
So
that it is, it's just
what I have seen, there are some really savvy that will leverage that, rent it long term, or I'm going to rehab it and resell it quickly.
mm-hmm.
There are definitely some investors who will either they'll buy the property and then owner finance the sale,
Mm.
and they might have a balloon payment on it.
Mm-hmm.
And what they're really doing is they're getting their upfront sale price, but then they're getting interest long term, right? So
Mm-hmm.
kind of doubling up on the investment.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they'll do rent to own situations also in those
Mm-hmm.
scenarios that allows them to basically get the house rehab, get it under contract. But now they get that cash flow over that period of time, and they
Mm-hmm.
get appreciation over a period of time.
Mm-hmm. But
So
so generally your typical home seller isn't looking to try and do a rent to own or anything like that.
not typically. I
Oh,
mean, right
yeah.
now you're seeing, not that they don't exist.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the average consumer out there knows what the market is right now and knows that homes are selling quickly and are selling
Yeah,
for, solid prices.
sure. Mm-hmm.
When you're buying properties at a discount, you're usually, it has little to do with the real estate for the seller. What you're
Mm-hmm.
really doing is solving a real estate problem.
Problem. Mm-hmm.
Most of the people who sell homes at a discount, they have some problem, and you are
Yep.
solving that problem, right? So, and by the way, it's not always a money issue, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the homes we purchased was a doctor. That doctor got relocated,
Mm.
and the doctor said, look, I don't have time. I got to be here for my new residency or whatever it is on this day. I don't have time to mess with the market. I know I'm going to lose money. I can afford it, and I don't care.
Mm-hmm.
And sold a perfectly good house under market value for the convenience.
Yep.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
In other scenarios, it's the level of repairs on the home has gotten beyond what the homeowner can handle.
Yeah.
And in that scenario, whether they go live in MLS or sell off market, in any case, they're going to be dealing with an investor or a consumer with a rehab loan. So it's
Mm-hmm.
got some level of a discount anyway. So
Mm-hmm.
usually there's a problem that puts
Yeah.
a consumer in that bucket of somebody who benefits from selling it.
Mm-hmm.
End of the day, their biggest motivation isn't the most amount of money. It's some
Yeah.
convenience or getting rid of a problem.
Sure.
Regular sellers, there's not a lot of motivation today to do
Yeah.
things other than there's a ton of them selling off market for market value, but selling off market. A ton of it's happening. And that is because of the fear of once I sell my house, where am I going to go? Right. So now if I can get a solid offer and I can get it without listing my house,
Yeah.
the buyer's willing to give me more flexibility on closing to go look for my next home.
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden that becomes interesting and attractive to me. So there's a ton selling off market. Most of those, they're either selling at market value or the consumer at least believes they're getting market value. I certainly have seen some in my own area that have sold below market, off market. Unfortunately, that's a seller who just did not realize.
Yeah.
Had they put the home on the market, what they actually would have gotten. And they, in exchange for the convenience, they did leave money on the table. But that's what you're seeing with traditional sellers. Yeah.
Okay.
Karina, I saw you had your hand up for a minute.
Yeah, I was gonna say that whole rent to own thing, a lot of times I find that the buyers who want to rent to own don't have the credit score to buy. And the people who are looking to sell their houses rent to own want too much money for what that property is worth. That's just been my what I've seen with that scenario.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah.
Yeah. The one thing I do want to stress though is that off-market opportunity is massive. Like, so if you have buyers that you can't, the thing they're looking for isn't available, you should be calling in a TCPA compliant way. You should be calling, knocking, mailing, whatever you can do to get in front of individuals who are not listed but own a home that fits your buyer's needs in an area that fits your buyer's needs. There are a lot of sales happening that way. I've used it as an example multiple times. At the very, last few years ago, the street that I live on only has, I think, 12 or 13 houses on it. I knew when I moved in, there was a high likelihood that the street was about to turn over just because of the demographic of the folks who lived here. Like, it just made sense that almost everybody who lived on the street either built the house or moved in within 5 years of the house being built. Right. So at this point, their kids were all grown up out of their houses. Like, it just made sense that these houses were going to start selling. But I think 3 out of the first 4 homes that sold on my street sold off market. And they were all similar. There was a realtor involved in every one of them. They just did not go in MLS. And everyone was that same situation. They wanted the convenience. They didn't want to deal with 1,000 people coming through the house. They wanted a buyer who was willing to give them flexibility on closing so that they knew their house was sold as soon as they were ready. And for that flexibility, they were willing to give up some of what they might have gotten if they went live on MLS and had a more competitive situation. So they made an educated decision based on their own needs and prioritized that convenience over whatever extra money they could have gotten from the competitive scenario in MLS. So there's a ton of that happening. So being proactive to tap into that is smart. So, all right. Unless there are more questions or comments, that is what I have for you today. Cassie, are we on for next week? I'll look. Okay, she wasn't ready.
I was going to say, I'm getting conflicting information. Let me just double check.
It looks like we are off.
Not next week. It's the 10th. Yep.
Yes. Next week, I will be teaching live in my market center on Tuesday. So we will be back on the 10th.
Yes.
Yes. Cool. All right. See y'all then.
Thanks, Matt.